The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive silence. Daniel Harper stood just inside the revolving glass doors, his small duffel bag hanging from one shoulder, his other hand tightly holding his son's. The hotel rose around them like a cathedral built for people who never had to count their breaths before checking a balance. Ethan squeezed his hand. "Daddy, are we in the right place?" Daniel looked down and forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy, we are." He said it with the calm confidence of a father, even though a familiar weight pressed against his chest, the quiet fear of being somewhere he didn't belong. The hotel wasn't part of the plan. Not originally. But when your apartment ceiling starts leaking black water at 3 in the morning, when the landlord stops answering calls, and when your 8-year-old has asthma and starts coughing through the night, plans change. You adapt. You survive. Daniel had booked the cheapest room he could find in this hotel using points he didn't really have and a credit card he prayed wouldn't decline. Just 2 nights, he told himself. 2 nights of warmth, safety, and clean air for Ethan. That was all he wanted. The front desk sat at the center of the lobby, all glass and chrome, staffed by 3 employees in tailored uniforms. They looked up as Daniel approached, and in that first glance he felt it. The assessment. Not curiosity, not welcome, judgment. Daniel had learned to recognize it over the years. It came with being a single father who wore worn shoes and carried responsibility like an extra limb. People saw the exhaustion before they saw the effort. "Good evening," he said politely, placing his ID on the counter. "I have a reservation." Daniel Harper. The woman at the desk typed slowly, her expression neutral but distant. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then to the duffel bag. "Credit card," she said flatly. Daniel slid it across. She swiped it once, then again. A pause stretched longer than it needed to. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Finally, the screen beeped. Approved. No apology for the wait. No smile. Just a room key slid across the counter. "Elevators are to your left." "Thank you," Daniel said. He always said thank you, even when it wasn't returned. They crossed the lobby toward the elevators, passing guests in pressed suits and flowing dresses. Ethan's eyes widened as he took it all in. The chandelier overhead, the fountain murmuring softly in the corner. "This place looks like a movie," Ethan whispered. Daniel chuckled quietly. "Yeah, it kind of does." But movies didn't show what it felt like to be the extra. The background character. The one everyone assumed had no influence on how the story ended. Their room was small but spotless. Crisp white sheets, soft lighting, a view of the city that glittered like it didn't know hardship existed. Ethan bounced onto the bed, laughing. Daniel sat on the edge, rubbing his temples. For a moment he allowed himself to breathe. This was enough. This had to be enough. He ordered room service, just soup and bread. Something warm, something simple. Ethan ate happily, telling him about a story he'd read at school. Daniel nodded, listening, grounding himself in the sound of his son's voice. Later, needing water and extra towels, Daniel took Ethan with him back downstairs. He didn't want to leave him alone. He never did. The lobby was busier now. That's when it happened. A man in a dark blazer, hotel staff by the look of the badge, brushed past Ethan without slowing. Ethan stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel reacted instinctively. "Hey!" he said sharply, pulling Ethan back. "Watch it." The man turned, annoyance already etched across his face. "Control your kid," he snapped. Daniel felt something cold rise in his chest. "You almost knocked him over." The man scoffed. "This isn't a playground." "I'm aware," Daniel replied, his voice controlled. "That's why I expect staff to act professionally." A few heads turned. The man's expression hardened. "What did you say to me?" Daniel stood straighter. "I said." The slap came without warning. A sharp crack echoed through the lobby. Time fractured. Daniel staggered half a step, his face burning. The taste of blood filled his mouth. For a split second, he wasn't aware of anything except the sound of Ethan gasping. Then he heard it. "Dad!" Ethan's small hands clutched his jacket, shaking. The lobby froze. Guests stared. Staff stared. Security stood still. No one moved. No one spoke. Daniel felt every instinct scream inside him. To shout, to retaliate, to demand justice. But Ethan was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. So Daniel swallowed. He lowered himself to Ethan's level, gently brushing the boy's hair back. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I've got you." The man who slapped him scoffed again. "You people always cause problems." Daniel didn't respond. He stood there, cheek red, pride bruised, holding his son while an entire room chose comfort over courage. That silence, more than the slap, told him everything. And in that moment, as humiliation settled like dust on polished marble, Daniel made a choice. He would not break. He would not beg. He would stand, even if no one else did. If you've ever felt judged for simply trying to protect or provide for someone you love, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this are built on lived emotions, not fiction alone. The silence didn't break, thickened. Daniel could feel it pressing in from all sides, the kind of quiet that wasn't peace, but permission. Permission for what had just happened to remain unchallenged. He straightened slowly, his jaw tight, his cheek still burning. Across from him, the man in the blazer rolled his shoulder once, as if shaking off a minor inconvenience. "Take your kid and move," the man said. Not loudly, not angrily, just certain that nothing would happen to him. Daniel looked around the lobby. At the front desk, the woman who had checked him in stared at her screen as if it had suddenly become fascinating. Another employee pretended to rearrange brochures that didn't need rearranging. Security stood near the entrance. Two men in identical uniforms. Their posture alert, their faces blank. Watching, waiting, for Daniel to explode. For Daniel to prove whatever story they had already written about him. Ethan clutched Daniel's jacket tighter. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" he whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. "No," he said softly, though the word tasted like a lie. "You didn't do anything wrong." The man laughed under his breath. "Unbelievable. You bring a kid into a place like this and act surprised when things don't go your way." Daniel met his eyes for the first time. Up close, the man wasn't intimidating. Mid-40s, neatly groomed. The kind of confidence that came from systems bending around him long enough that he mistook it for strength. "You hit me," Daniel said calmly. The words were steady, measured. "I corrected you," the man replied. "Big difference." A murmur rippled through the guests nearby. Not outrage, not support. Curiosity, entertainment. Daniel felt it then, the shift where a human moment became a spectacle. He hated that most of all. "I want to speak to a manager," Daniel said. The man smirked. "I am management." That landed harder than the slap. Daniel nodded once, absorbing it. "Then I want this documented. Cameras, reports, witness statements." The man's smile thinned. "You really want to make this harder on yourself?" Daniel didn't answer, because he already knew the answer. Harder was a language he spoke fluently. One of the security guards finally stepped forward. "Sir," he said to Daniel, tone neutral but edged with impatience. "Let's all calm down." Daniel glanced at him. "He assaulted me." The guard hesitated, just long enough for Daniel to understand exactly where this was going. "Maybe we should escort you back to your room," the guard said. Escort. Not protect. Not intervene. Remove. Daniel felt Ethan's breathing quicken against his side. He placed a hand gently on his son's back. "We're not leaving," Daniel said quietly. "Not until this is addressed." The man in the blazer sighed dramatically. "You see what I mean? Always pushing." Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. Not because he wanted to fight, but because restraint takes effort and effort hurts. Guests began pulling out phones. Subtle at first. A raised hand. Tilted screen. Red recording lights blinking like tiny witnesses that didn't care about justice. Only virality. Daniel noticed. The staff noticed too. That changed things slightly. The man straightened his jacket. "This ends now," he said sharply. "You're causing a disturbance." "I was slapped," Daniel repeated. Louder this time. Clear. In front of my child. That did it. The room shifted again, not toward empathy but toward discomfort. Because now it wasn't just a scene. It was a liability. The front desk woman finally looked up. Sir, maybe we can take this somewhere private? Daniel shook his head. No. It happened here. The man's face darkened. You're done, he snapped. Security. Enough. The word didn't come from Daniel. It came from a voice behind them. Calm, controlled, carrying weight without volume. Everyone turned. A man stood near the entrance, tall, silver at the temples, dressed simply but impeccably. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't rushed in. He didn't need to. The air recognized him before anyone else did. The staff stiffened instinctively. The man in the blazer froze. Sir, he said quickly, forcing a smile. I didn't realize you were. The older man raised a hand gently. His eyes weren't on the staff member. They were on Daniel. On the red mark blooming across his cheek. On Ethan, pressed protectively against his father's side. Something unreadable crossed the older man's face. Recognition. Not vague. Not polite. Personal. He took one step forward. Then another. Daniel met his gaze, unsure why his pulse suddenly changed rhythm. Is this true? The older man asked quietly. No accusation. No assumption. Just a question. The staff member swallowed. Sir, there was a misunderstanding. I wasn't asking you, the man said. His eyes never left Daniel. Daniel hesitated, not out of fear but instinct. He'd learned not to expect rescue. Yes, Daniel said finally. He hit me. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. The older man nodded once. Then he turned slightly, his voice still calm, still even. Lock the doors. One of the security guards blinked. Sir. Now. Keys moved. Metal clicked. The revolving door stopped. Phones lowered. This was no longer entertainment. It was reckoning. The man in the blazer laughed nervously. Come on. This is ridiculous. The older man faced him fully now. You put your hands on him, he said. Not a question. A statement. Sir, I was handling a situation. You assaulted a guest. The older man continued. In front of witnesses. In front of a child. His gaze flicked briefly to Ethan. Something tightened there. We're initiating an internal review, he said. Immediately. The staff member's face drained of color. Security, the older man said. Collect all footage. Every angle. No one leaves until we're done. The guards moved, this time without hesitation. Daniel stood silently, his heart pounding. Not with triumph. With disbelief. The older man turned back to him. Daniel, he said softly. Hearing his name spoken like that, Noan did something unexpected. Yes, Daniel replied. The man exhaled slowly. I owe you more than an apology. Daniel didn't respond. Because suddenly, the question wasn't whether anyone had seen the incident. It was how much of the truth was about to come out with it. If this moment made your chest tighten, if you felt that silence, that injustice, a quiet like or reaction lets this story reach others who understand it too. No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because saying anything now carried weight. Daniel stood where he was, Ethan still tucked close against him, as security began moving with purpose instead of posture. Radios crackled softly. One guard moved toward the control room. Another positioned himself near the elevators. The doors remained locked. The lobby no longer felt like a public space. It felt like a room where decisions were about to be made, permanent ones. The man in the blazer shifted from one foot to the other. The confidence he'd worn so easily minutes earlier now sat awkwardly, like a jacket that didn't fit once the weather changed. This is being blown out of proportion, he muttered. The older man didn't respond. Instead, he turned slowly, surveying the lobby, the staff at the desk, the concierge by the entrance, the supervisors pretending to be invisible. All of you saw what happened, he said calmly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. I want to know, he continued. How many of you decided it wasn't your problem? No one answered. A young concierge swallowed hard. A front desk employee stared at her hands. One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably, eyes down. The man nodded, as if he'd expected this. Silence, he said, is a choice. Daniel felt those words settle deep in his chest. He'd lived with silence most of his adult life. The silence of unanswered emails, ignored complaints, polite smiles that hid refusal. Silence was how systems avoided responsibility while convincing themselves they were neutral. But silence was never neutral. The older man turned back to Daniel. Are you hurt? He asked. Daniel touched his cheek briefly. I'll be fine. Ethan looked up. My dad didn't do anything wrong. The man crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Ethan's level. His voice softened. I know, he said, and thank you for saying that. Ethan nodded once, serious in the way only children could be. Behind them, the man in the blazer scoffed. This is ridiculous. We're running a business here. That finally earned him the older man's full attention. Yes, he said quietly. And that's exactly the problem. He straightened and turned toward the front desk. Pull guest records, he instructed. I want to know how often complaints involving this man have been dismissed. The woman hesitated. Sir, that will take. Now. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. The older man continued. Security, I want statements. From everyone who was on duty, including those who decided to look away. One of the guards cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, this could get complicated. The man's expression didn't change. Good, he said. It should. Daniel watched it all unfold with a strange detachment. This wasn't vindication. Not yet. It was exposure. And exposure was uncomfortable for everyone. The man in the blazer took a step forward. Sir, I've worked here for 12 years. I've handled dozens of situations like this. You're taking one guest's word. One guest? The older man interrupted gently. He gestured around the lobby. Look around you, he said. You have witnesses, cameras, recordings. A child who watched his father be struck. He paused. And you, he added, have a history. That landed. The staff member's face tightened. What history? The front desk woman spoke before she could stop herself. There were complaints, she said quietly, about how he spoke to guests, to staff. The room shifted again. The man in the blazer turned sharply. You didn't say. You told us not to document everything, she replied, her voice trembling but firm. You said it made us look weak. The older man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. This, he said, is what silence costs. He turned to Daniel once more. You didn't raise your voice, he said. You didn't retaliate. You protected your son. Daniel shrugged slightly. That's my job. The older man studied him. You did your job, he said. Others didn't. A tablet was handed to him. He scanned the screen. Footage paused on a frame that showed exactly what Daniel remembered. The raised hand, the open palm, the moment before impact. No distortion. No ambiguity. The truth. Preserved. The man handed the tablet back. Begin termination proceedings, he said calmly. Effective immediately. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. What? The man in the blazer shouted. You can't be serious. I am, the older man replied. You're done here. You're destroying my career over one moment. No, the man said evenly. You destroyed it over years. Security stepped in. The man's voice rose, then cracked. This isn't fair. The older man looked at him, not with anger, but with something colder. Neither was what you did. As the staff member was escorted away, the lobby remained silent. Not performative silence this time, but reflective. People were realizing something important. It hadn't taken power to stop this. It had taken presence. The older man turned to the remaining staff. This review isn't over, he said. Anyone who failed to act will be evaluated. Thoroughly. A few people nodded. Others looked like they might cry. Daniel felt Ethan relax slightly against him. Daddy? Ethan whispered. Are we okay? Daniel looked at him. Yes, he said, and for the first time that night he meant it. The older man stepped closer to Daniel, lowering his voice. You shouldn't have had to endure that, he said. Especially here. Daniel met his gaze. I didn't expect anyone to step in. The man nodded. That's what worries me most. He paused. Come with me, he said. There's more you deserve to know. Daniel hesitated, then nodded, because whatever silence had hidden for years, it was finally breaking. And once broken, it couldn't be put back together again. They walked away from the lobby without ceremony. No spotlight followed them. No apologies shouted across marble floors. Just the soft sound of footsteps moving down a quieter corridor, where the walls were paneled in dark wood and the air felt heavier, older. Daniel kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder as they walked. He didn't know where they were going, only that something fundamental had shifted, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The older man led them into a private office tucked behind the administrative wing. The door closed gently behind them, sealing off the chaos they'd left behind. Please, the man said, gesturing to a couch. Sit. Daniel hesitated, then sat. Ethan climbed up beside him, still holding tight. The man didn't sit immediately. He poured water from a glass pitcher, hands steady, movements unhurried. When he finally turned, his eyes softened, not with pity, but with memory. I never thought I'd see you again like this, he said quietly. Daniel frowned. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? The man smiled faintly. You saved my life. The words landed slowly. Daniel searched his face, his mind reaching backward through years of exhaustion, hospital rooms, night shifts, moments he'd filed away because dwelling on them didn't help anyone survive. Then it clicked. You were the man in the accident, Daniel said slowly. On the interstate, the overturned car. The man nodded once. I was bleeding out, he said. Trapped. My phone was crushed. Everyone drove past. Daniel remembered it vividly now. The smell of gasoline, the twisted metal, the way he'd pulled over without thinking even though Ethan was crying in the back seat. You broke the window, the man continued. You used your own belt as a tourniquet. You stayed until the ambulance came. Daniel swallowed. Anyone would have. No, the man said gently. Most didn't. The room went quiet. I tried to find you afterward, the man said. But all I had was a first name and a state-issued ID number from the police report. By the time I tracked you down, you'd moved. Daniel looked down at his hands. I lost my wife that year, the man continued. That accident changed everything. It slowed me down, forced me to look at who I was becoming. He paused. And today, he said, I watched the man who saved my life be humiliated in my own hotel. Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. Not anger, not relief, recognition. I didn't want special treatment, Daniel said quietly. I just wanted my son to be safe. I know, the man replied. And that's why this matters. He leaned forward slightly. Power, he said, reveals itself most clearly in how it treats people who can't fight back. Ethan shifted. My dad didn't fight, he said softly. He stayed calm. The man smiled at him. That takes more strength than fighting. Daniel exhaled slowly. So what happens now? He asked. The man straightened. Now, he said, we finish what should have been done years ago. He tapped a button on the desk phone. Begin phase 2, he said calmly. Full staff audit. Front desk, concierge, security, supervisors. Anyone complicit in misconduct or silence. A voice crackled back. Understood, sir. He hung up. This hotel has hidden behind luxury, he said. Behind branding. Behind assumptions about who matters. He looked at Daniel. Today exposed the lie. Daniel felt uneasy. I don't want people punished just because they froze. The man considered this. Freezing once is human, he said. Building a culture where freezing is expected is criminal. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm also closing this location temporarily, the man added. Daniel's eyes widened. Closing? Yes, he said simply. Effective tonight. That's drastic. So was letting someone believe they could strike a father in front of his child without consequence. Daniel didn't argue, because he knew the truth. Systems didn't change with warnings. They changed with consequences. The man reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. I reviewed your file, he said. After the accident, I kept tabs. Quietly, Daniel stiffened. You what? Nothing invasive, he said quickly. Public records, employment history, credit reports. Daniel laughed humorlessly. Then you know I'm not exactly thriving. I know you're surviving, the man replied. And that's harder. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were documents, not contracts, not offers, but something else. Restitution, a formal apology, a written acknowledgement of wrongdoing, coverage for legal counsel if Daniel wanted it, medical evaluation for both him and Ethan, relocation assistance optional. Daniel stared. This isn't hush money, the man said firmly. It's accountability. Daniel closed the folder gently. I don't want to be bought, he said. The man nodded. Good, because this isn't about money. He paused. I want my hotels to be places where no child ever watches their parent be degraded again. Silence settled between them, this time honest. Ethan yawned, finally exhausted. Daniel lifted him gently, resting the boy's head against his shoulder. I don't know what to say, Daniel admitted. You don't have to say anything, the man replied. Just don't disappear this time. Daniel met his eyes. I won't, he said. They stood. As they walked back toward the door, the man stopped. One more thing, he said. Yes. He smiled, just slightly. Thank you. Again. Daniel nodded. Some debts couldn't be repaid, but they could be honored. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not victory, not relief. Justice finally catching up to silence. The hotel did not sleep that night. Phones rang behind closed doors. Emails flew between departments that had never spoken directly before. Supervisors were summoned from beds and dinners, their confusion sharpening into fear as they learned the words full audit were not symbolic. They were surgical. Daniel sat in a quiet lounge adjacent to the office, Ethan asleep across his lap, the soft rise and fall of the boy's chest anchoring him. He could hear footsteps in the corridor beyond the wall. Hurried, purposeful, unfamiliar. This was what accountability sounded like. The older man moved through it all without urgency, without anger. That was what unsettled people the most. Rage could be dismissed as emotion. Calm could not. A senior operations manager arrived first. Hair still damp, tie crooked, eyes alert but unsteady. What's going on? She asked, voice tight. I was told the hotel is closing. Yes, the man replied. Temporarily. That's going to cost millions. Then it should have cost less to protect a guest, he said. She swallowed. We followed protocol. Protocol, he said evenly, is not morality. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Show me the incident report, he said. She hesitated. There wasn't one filed. The pause stretched. Why? He asked. She exhaled. Because the manager on duty didn't instruct us to. Who was that? He asked. She gave the name. The older man nodded once. Bring them in. One by one, people were called. The concierge who looked away. The security guard who chose escort over intervention. The supervisor who dismissed complaints as misunderstandings. The front desk staff who had learned, over time, which guests were safe to disappoint. Each had a reason. I didn't want to escalate. I thought it would be handled. I was afraid of losing my job. He told us not to document. The older man listened to them all. Then he said something that left the room quiet every time. Fear explains behavior, he said. It does not excuse it. Files were opened, dates checked, patterns revealed. This wasn't one moment. It was a culture. At one point, the woman from the front desk broke down. I knew it was wrong, she said, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. But every time someone spoke up, they were punished. Schedules changed. Hours cut. Reviews destroyed. The man didn't interrupt her. When she finished, he nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." She looked up, startled. "Truth," he continued, "is where repair begins." Across the corridor, Daniel shifted slightly, careful not to wake Ethan. He didn't feel satisfaction watching power collapse. Only a quiet, steady gravity, like witnessing a long overdue storm finally break a drought. A senior executive argued next. "This is excessive," he insisted. "We're talking about optics now. Social media. Investors." The older man met his gaze. "You're talking about image," he said. "I'm talking about injury." The executive scoffed. No one was seriously hurt. Daniel stood. The movement caught everyone's attention. "I was," he said simply. No accusation. No raised voice. Just truth. "And so was my son," he added, looking down at Ethan. "He learned tonight that adults can hurt you and be protected by silence." No one spoke. The executive looked away. The man turned back to him. "You're relieved of duty," he said. "Effective immediately." "What?" the executive protested. "You can't." "I can," he replied. "And I am." Security moved again. This time, no one resisted. By dawn, the list was finalized. Terminations, suspensions, mandatory retraining, external oversight, an independent review board appointed. The hotel would close for 3 weeks. Public acknowledgement would follow. Daniel watched as the machinery of power dismantled itself. Not violently, not dramatically, but precisely, cleanly, without spectacle. The older man joined him as the sun began to bleed faint light through the high windows. "It's done," he said. Daniel nodded. "I didn't expect this," Daniel admitted. "Neither did they," the man replied. He looked at Ethan. "How's he holding up?" "Exhausted," Daniel said softly. "But okay." The man smiled faintly. "Children are resilient when they're protected." They stood together in silence for a moment. Then Daniel spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why go this far?" Daniel asked. "You could have settled this quietly." The man looked around the now emptied lobby. "Because quiet settlements preserve loud injustices," he said. "And because I owe you more than comfort. I owe you change." Daniel exhaled. "I don't need them ruined," he said. "I just needed it to stop." The man nodded. "Stopping is the beginning. Repair is the work." A staff member approached hesitantly. "Sir, the media has gotten wind of the closure." The man nodded. "Release the statement." Daniel tensed slightly. "It won't name you," the man said gently. "But it will name the failure." Daniel considered that. "Good," he said. Ethan stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy, I'm here," Daniel said, smiling softly. "Are we going home?" Daniel looked at the man. "You are," the man said. "And you won't be coming back here." Daniel chuckled quietly. "That's fine by me." As they walked toward the exit, now unlocked, morning air spilling in, Daniel paused. He turned back. "I don't want this to be the end," he said. "For them or for us." The man smiled, not with power, but with respect. "It won't be," he said. "It's just where silence stopped winning." Daniel stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. Behind him, a building that once mistook luxury for immunity stood quiet, stripped of noise, stripped of excuses. Power hadn't been taken. It had been broken open, and what spilled out was truth. Morning arrived without applause. No cameras waited outside. No crowd gathered to witness what had happened overnight. The hotel stood quiet, its glass reflecting a city that had already moved on. Daniel preferred it that way. He adjusted Ethan on his shoulder as they stepped into the early light. The boy was half asleep, trusting, unaware of how close fear had come, and how firmly it had been turned away. They didn't rush. For the first time in months, Daniel didn't feel chased by time, debt, or expectation. The pressure hadn't vanished, but something had shifted. The ground beneath him felt steadier. Car waited at the curb. Simple. Unmarked. The older man stood beside it, hands in his coat pockets. No entourage, no performance. "This will take you wherever you need to go," he said. "No obligation. No follow-up unless you want it." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment. Two men from different worlds, connected by a night neither would forget. "I want you to know something," the man said quietly. "What happened last night will follow me longer than it follows you." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "I built things," the man continued. "Hotels, systems, standards. I told myself they stood for something, but I never checked closely enough." He looked at the building behind them. "You did that for me." Daniel shook his head gently. "I didn't do anything special." "That's exactly the point," the man replied. Ethan stirred again. "Daddy, are we safe now?" Daniel kissed the top of his head. "Yeah, buddy. We are." The man smiled softly at the sound of it. "Take care of him," he said. "I always do," Daniel replied. They shook hands, not as benefactor and beneficiary, but as equals, as men who understood that dignity didn't require permission. The car pulled away smoothly. Daniel watched the hotel recede in the distance, its grandeur shrinking into just another building among many. He didn't feel triumph. He felt lighter. Later that afternoon, they sat in a small diner near the edge of the city. Nothing fancy. Vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and frying onions. The kind of place where no one looked twice at you for wearing tired shoes. Ethan devoured pancakes like the world had never heard him. Daniel watched him, heart full and aching at the same time. He thought about the staff who had been fired, the ones who had looked away, the ones who had spoken too late. Justice wasn't clean. It left ripples, but silence left scars. His phone buzzed softly. A notification. A news alert. Luxury hotel shuts down after internal review following guest assault. Daniel didn't open it. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about the hotel. It was about a child who saw his father stand still instead of striking back. About a system that learned too late but not too late to matter that power without ethics collapses under its own weight. About a man who thought survival meant shrinking, and discovered it meant standing quietly, fully, without apology. That night, in a modest motel room far from marble floors, Ethan fell asleep quickly. Daniel sat beside him, listening to the hum of an old air conditioner, thinking about how close he'd come to believing dignity was something you had to earn. He knew better now. Dignity was something you protected even when no one else did. Especially then. He turned off the light, and for the first time in a long while the dark didn't feel threatening. Felt earned. If stories about quiet strength, dignity under pressure, and justice without cruelty matter to you, this channel is for you. Subscribe to stay with narratives where integrity speaks louder than power.